It's fine to make adjustments based on results. And I think that's the key here. You need to try and avoid making adjustments based on knee-jerk reactions to things that are going on in the world and even within your organization.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanoff.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Hello, listeners, and welcome to Season 5 of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Rich Frazier.
And I'm your other host, Russ Fanoff.
Happy New Year, Russ.
Thanks, Rich. Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Thanks for joining us for another season of Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
5 seasons. That's a longer run than the original Star Trek series, which I'm still trying to catch up on. And Succession, which, I just started season 4 of Succession.
Yeah, it's impressive. We've got a long ways to go to beat out Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
But for now, let's focus on what we're going to discuss today and go ahead and tell our listeners what we're discussing.
Yeah, so late last year, the Chronicle of Philanthropy posted an article called Chronicle's Exclusive Survey Finds Skittish Donors and Fundraisers Searching for a New Normal. And anytime we can use the word skittish in a title, I'm here for it. I'm going to read the article.
Yeah.
So it was based on their 2023 survey of 1,000 fundraisers. And we're going to discuss some of the findings in the survey, our take on what fundraisers will face in 2024, and some tips on how to have a successful year.
And to dive into this topic today, we welcome back one of our favorite guests.
I would say the most favorite.
I would say the most favorite too. No offense to our other guests. You're all lovely. But here is Samantha Timlick, VP of Client Services for IPM Advancement. Welcome back, Samantha.
Woo!
Oh my goodness. Setting the bar high, aren't we, gentlemen, on this first podcast of the new year?
Gotta kick it off, right?
We love having you on this show.
Thank you. I love to be here. Like they said, Samantha Timlick, VP of Client Services with IPM, and I am very excited to talk about this article and sort of what it means for us moving into this new year.
Thank you, Samantha, for joining us. Hey, Russ, why don't we dive in? I'm going to let you start.
So there's lots to talk about in this article. We're going to just kind of go through point by point. I'll give you a little bit of a summary of some of the initial top lines. So to start off, the survey looked at 1,000 fundraisers, got feedback from them, and the general consensus was that support in terms of individual giving was artificially high during the pandemic. And now fundraisers are worried. And during the pandemic, we saw a lot of giving took place to meet the needs of these public health emergency issues that we were dealing with. But a lot of folks are unsure how that's going to play out over the next 2 or 3 years. Will we see that completely drop off? Will there be a tapering off? Will folks keep their giving at the same level or even increase it? There's a lot of uncertainty, and folks aren't sure how to respond to that uncertainty. It does look like there's a bell curve in terms of how organizations did in 2023. It looks like 34% roughly are raising more money, about 42% are holding steady, and 23% reported raising less. And just the disclaimer that the survey was conducted by Clarion Research, the margin of error is 5% at a 95% confidence level.
Russ, I want to go back to that first point about sort of that artificially high fundraising that took place during the pandemic. We had this period at the onset of the pandemic where a lot of nonprofits that were public facing had to close their doors. We can't invite the public in anymore. And so there was this onslaught of fundraising appeals asking for help. We need to keep paying our utilities. We need to keep paying our employees. We need to keep putting our mission out there in the world. Will you please help us? And in general, citizens stepped up and supported our nonprofits.
I think there's a couple of things going on, and we'll talk about this more as the discussion moves forward. But I do think all of this is it's almost like the pandemic was a giant rapid response event.
Exactly.
People stepped up, they got involved, they got engaged. And then, after things got back to this quote unquote new normal, folks have stepped back. I also think on top of that, we also have some significant demographic changes that are happening in the United States.
Yeah.
When you combine that with what's going on in the economy and how it is affecting those individual generations of Americans, I think it gives us a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. So contributions to nonprofits, according to the Giving USA estimates, fell about 10.5% after inflation. And individual giving actually took an even harder hit. It fell a little over 13% in 2022. And that really erased a lot of gains that were, or perceived gains, I should say, that were made during the pandemic. Samantha, what's your take on this?
Well, since a lot of my work is in the annual fund, this really is part of one of the phenomenon that I saw play out for a lot of our clients last year. So particularly in direct mail, response rates for some of our longer term clients where we've really been tracking it, we're talking over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, they were a bit lower last year. And, I think kind of we all knew that what happened before was a unique response to a unique time. I think the real challenge that we're having, or at least that I'm having in terms of projections, is things aren't writing the same way for everyone, and they're not necessarily writing quickly. The ship is not writing itself quickly. And so it's kind of like, when do you start making those adjustments and when do you plan for them? So again, direct mail response rates were lower for a lot of our clients last year, but we did still see some higher dollar gifts come in that allowed a lot of projects to meet revenue goal. My concern there, of course, is that it only takes a handful of those big donors to not respond to have your effort then fall short.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into another point that they found in the survey. 7 in 10 fundraisers said that they have groups of donors that are giving less, and 6 in 10 said some donors have just stopped giving altogether. So there's a real fall off in the number of donors on the file. And another half of fundraisers say that there are some donors who are delaying their gifts.
I would absolutely say that we saw that in the annual fund, particularly. So last year in 2023, like I said, we saw some issues with response rates. There was a decline in people actually responding to individual efforts. And I would say that going back to 2022, that's when we saw more of a softness in average gift. As for the delayed giving, we definitely saw that in 2023, but I would say we saw that in 2022 to a degree as well. Again, in particularly on the direct mail side of things, because spring was very soft both years, and then we saw a really solid rebound come fall and year end. Now, 2023 year-end gifts are still coming in. Those projects have not fully matured yet. So we don't exactly know what 2023 is going to look like when all is said and done. But I would say that in 2023, we were closer to hitting average gift goals, but that's only because we had already decreased our goals for 2023 based on what we saw in 2022.
I think that really highlights a vulnerability that a lot of nonprofits have. The fact that donors are reducing, delaying, or even stopping their contributions, some of that can have a real impact on how smaller nonprofits or mid-sized nonprofits operate. We need to keep being transparent and demonstrating and showing the donor, here's the impact of your gift. Your gift keeps the lights on. Your gift keeps these programs running. Your gift gets our staff paid. When you don't make that gift, these things don't happen. We can find nicer ways of saying that, of course, but that message needs to get out there. It's transparency and its impact.
Yeah, and the other factor here, again, that we're dealing with that we haven't dealt with since really the 80s has been this persistent inflation. So inflation slowed to about 3.7% in September of 2023. In June 2022, it was over 9%. But a lot of prices are still going up, and that means that nonprofits need to raise more money. A $100 gift today is not what it really was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think inflation in the economy, it's obviously a challenge for everyone. And not only are times tough, but we're being told that times are tough. Like everywhere you look, people are talking about it. And on our telefundraising calls in particular, which is a great opportunity to get sort of direct donor feedback. You don't have a lot of broad-based outreach efforts where you get that kind of immediate feedback from your donors and prospects. And on those calls, the economy was the number one reason last year that folks made for not giving or for giving less or for saying, hey, call me back in a couple of months. It's absolutely, it was on everyone's minds. And, we're just starting a new year here, but I think it still is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think keeping it focused on individual giving, if we can geek out a little bit on the macroeconomic side of things, there's really 3 or 4 generations that make up the bulk of giving in the United States right now. And the first one is the older boomer donors. And a lot of those folks are moving to fixed incomes, whether that's retirement withdrawals or Social Security or pensions, or simply tightening their belts because of stock market volatility. 2 are the empty nester Gen X donors, kind of a smaller group, but they were never really that engaged with philanthropy to begin with. And many of these folks, these 45-ish to early 60s, are being squeezed by cost of living. Some of them are still paying off student loans. Some of them are putting kids through college while they're paying off their own student loans. And others are caring for aging parents. And many others are dealing with a combination of all those things. And then you've got, the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, they really haven't been trained on traditional philanthropic giving. Their experience with giving might be more aligned with crowd-raising sites like GoFundMe. And when you look at how they've been asked for money, a lot of them only have experience giving political campaigns $5 every 4 years. The infamous, will you pitch in ask that these younger folks have all received.
And since we're calling out our generations here, as a millennial, I can say that I see a lot of that in my friend group, not just these low dollar gifts, but absolutely the GoFundMe, giving directly to people as opposed to organizations.
Yeah.
And also sort of this a lot more activism happening, a lot more, I don't give, but I show up. I want to volunteer. I want to march. I want to be seen and be heard, and all of those things that don't necessarily translate into dollars in the door for nonprofits.
Russ, can I jump into the next point out of this report?
Yeah.
Because I thought this one was particularly shocking, and this is the decline in large donations. If we look at the first 9 months of 2023, there were about 400 donations of $1 million plus. Compared to the same time period of 2022, there were 478 donations of $1 million plus. Not a big difference. There's only about 70 gifts difference. But if you look at the total giving, there's an $8 billion swing. There was about $16.5 billion that was given in 2022 and $8 billion given in 2023. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference in what nonprofits are able to do. And it shows that we have a big reliance on these big donors. And when they don't show up, it shows out.
For me, this is one of those like I told you so stats, because over the past several years, we saw major donors step up their giving in response to the pandemic. And that caused at least some nonprofits to shift their resources away from things like the annual fund and shifting them into major giving. That in and of itself is not a problem. We need to go where the dollars are. Major donors are extremely important to nonprofit fundraising, as evidenced by these stats. But when you cut off the feeder line to major giving, and that's exactly what the annual fund is, like that is how you bring new people into the fold. It's how you identify and cultivate the people who are going to be then capable of giving those larger gifts. When you cut that off, you're going to feel the pain of that decision sooner or later. It's sort of like when an organization stops prospecting for new donors. Do they save money in the short term? Of course they do, because it takes money to bring donors on the file.
Mm-hmm.
But then are they putting themselves behind in the long term? Also, absolutely. As fundraisers, we really have to balance immediate benefit with long-term consequences. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits kind of misstepped here in shifting their resources away from lower dollar donors and really focusing on major donors, because then when those major donors pull back, it's really hard to correct things moving forward.
I'm totally with you there, Samantha. And, major donors are awesome, but, we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. So diversifying those funding streams, continue seeking out those smaller donations from a broader base, get those mid-level gifts, go back to your grassroots fundraising efforts, and yes, your annual fund efforts, Ms. Timlick.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
One of the things that the survey called out was we're seeing a lot of unpredictable giving behavior, and especially for small donors, we're not really seeing a very consistent pattern with small donors. And a lot of small donors who make pretty modest one-time and recurring contributions are canceling their gifts as the economic uncertainty sets in and inflation is affecting folks. And we actually had Allie Colbrand, who is the director of development for Feeding San Diego. She was quoted in the Chronicle article, and she was a guest on Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange back in October. And she made this same point about seeing her monthly donors cancel and new donors coming on who were giving less than former first-time donors in previous years. So Samantha, what are you seeing with some of our clients who are experiencing those issues?
Yeah, so I can absolutely second that new donors are giving less, and it's harder to bring them onto the file in the first place. So prospecting last year, even when appeal efforts were going pretty well, prospecting was a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's just a matter of people deciding to use their limited resources with nonprofits that they're already engaged with. That's my best guess there. And that really has a cascading effect down the line. Because if you bring a donor on, say you're used to bringing a donor on at $30, and now your average gift for a new donor is $20, when those people renew the next year, hopefully, now your 0 to 12-month donor average has come down. And it sort of continues to go that way. And can you bring people up in their giving over time? Absolutely. That's one of the things that we focus on here at IPM through our calculated ask amounts and how we talk to people about that sort of thing. But when you're starting from a lower position, it's just harder to get back ahead.
Yeah, one of the other things I want to say too is that we have all been pushing monthly giving for a long time now, for years, and we've seen some good response. But I think there really is a monthly recurring charge fatigue that is happening in the world. And every time a service like Netflix bumps up their charge, it sets people off. And so, as much as we want to continue to push sustainer giving, we do have to be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of folks who are starting to tune out monthly giving and monthly charges, and they'll simply cancel subscriptions across the board in personal protest to all this. And a lot of folks just start over. They say, what do I really, really need to charge monthly in order to maintain my standard of living and kind of keep my bank account in check? So thinking about that, it might behoove some organizations to start making smaller asks multiple times a year.
Yeah.
Get out of this mindset of thinking about annual giving happens once a year, or, we really rely on Giving Tuesday to nail down everybody for that big gift once a year. Folks aren't thinking about that anymore. Folks tend to move on fairly quickly after they make a donation, and the best people you can get to give, the most likely folks to respond to an appeal, are the people who just gave.
And I was just thinking that when you were talking about the monthly fatigue, that, if we can ask people more frequently, hit me up in a text message, tell me that the impact of my gift is important to your organization and why, and make it easy for me to give. Click this link, let me use Apple Pay or Google Pay, make it easy to be transactional about it. I'm there.
I think you hit on a really important point here, Russ, which I hadn't thought about before, but I can see that in my my own life and people that I talk to. I was just having a conversation with a girl the other day about her gym membership. And she made the comment that like, oh, well, I can pay upfront $400 for the year and be done, and I'll try it out for a couple months and see if I like it. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you rather just pay monthly? And so you don't have this big output in case you don't want to keep going. And she's like, no, I'm tired of monthly fees. Like I have so many monthly fees now. Everyone wants you to sign up for a monthly thing.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a very good point. Maybe not pushing sustainers, but with that said, we did see several clients, newer clients to IPM who had just sort of started working with us. We did some very simple things for them in terms of optimizing their reply forms and their landing pages to kind of get that monthly giving option up there more easy for people to see and access. And that seems to still be an effective means of getting folks enrolled. It's very low cost. You really don't have to, it's no cost in some cases, right? You're just adjusting how you've been doing things. So you're not going to see great returns from that, but I think that that's the best way to sort of try and keep a steady drumbeat of that type of ask. And yes, absolutely, supplementing it with, going out there and asking for money on a consistent basis.
One more thing I want to address before we move away from the individual giving side of the survey. They did talk about donor-advised funds. And again, donor-advised funds are one of those things that we've seen kind of supplant some of the higher-end individual giving that we would have received from individual donors. They're giving through these DAFs. And some organizations might not be very adept at asking those folks to make that gift. So they aren't sure as a fundraiser who has a DAF to give through or how much money that DAF may contain. So there's a lot of outstanding questions, and a lot of fundraisers, according to the survey, just really aren't in a place where they're super comfortable about donor-advised funds.
I believe we've spoken about donor-advised funds on the podcast before too, and I remember the big takeaway there was to remember that DAFs are giving vehicles, and in order to secure those gifts, you've got to be doing all of the things you need to do to secure a gift in any other format.
And ask them, is this a vehicle that you prefer to use? Is this a vehicle that you have set up already that you want to use? So you don't know if a donor has a donor advised fund unless you ask them.
Yeah. And again, if there is one in place, you do have to know about it, and it might change the timing of when you ask people for gifts during the year. So just be aware of it. So one of the things that they moved on to in the survey, they talked about internal issues and staffing issues and how fundraisers are feeling. And the general consensus was that fundraisers are under a lot of pressure. A little over 50% of fundraisers said that filling open positions is very challenging, and 40% say that their organization has open positions they're actively trying to fill. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about what we're seeing with clients and how that might be something to keep in mind and something that's in play for 2024.
Yeah, I mean, fundraising is already a difficult job to do. When we see a high turnover rate in fundraising staff for nonprofits, and now these folks are being asked to do more with less. Organizations are losing staff. They are losing funding because, we have a couple of clients whose work is funded through their investments, and their investments are down. So that's decreasing the money they then have available to go out and ask for funds. So yeah, I mean, fundraisers are absolutely feeling pinched in what is already a difficult job.
Yeah.
If you read this report and read between the lines, it's no wonder it's hard to fill these positions. It's a great time, boards of directors, executive directors, to really invest in your fundraising team. It's a great time to invest in professional development and to invest in those development departments and give them the tools that they need to do their jobs. Because, hey, if you do that, it'll start paying off in return on investment.
Yeah, and you might have to, because as part of the survey, 22% of respondents said that their organization has stopped filling fundraising positions. So you're going to have to lean on your board people. You're going to have to lean on those folks who aren't in those traditional fundraising roles to fill that gap and get out there and ask for money.
I know a lot of boards find it really hard to see the advantages of investing in development. But to your point, Russ, when they start getting leaned on to actually do the fundraising, they might find it a little easier to invest in development.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about morale. That was also something they looked into. 40% of fundraisers say their own morale, their personal morale, doing their job is low. Another 36% say overall in the industry, morale is low. 29% of respondents in the survey said that having those open fundraising positions contributes to low morale.
You think?
It's like this horrible cycle. And then 38% cited low pay or reduced benefits contributing to low morale. And another 40% said that the current economic conditions are contributing to low morale. And about that same amount, 4 out of 10 pointed to unrealistic expectations from managers and boards with respect to fundraising.
I would like to get on my soapbox for a little bit here.
Do it, yes.
And say, this is a real challenge. I feel like a lot of organizations don't give their development team, their fundraisers, enough credit.
Yeah.
When fundraising is going well, there's not enough celebrating. There's not enough kudos. It's just like this thing that happens in the background. And sometimes it's kind of annoying because the fundraisers are coming to you and they're wanting the stories or the data or whatever they need to kind of get stuff out there. And when fundraising is not going well, there's a ton of pressure on these people. So it's like there's not a ton of upside when things are good, but there is a huge downside when things are bad. Fundraisers can be treated like a nuisance at best and with disdain at worst within their own organizations. And look, I get it. Fundraising is not the sexiest thing about a nonprofit. It's the mission. It's the people who are being served. But without the fundraisers doing their thing, there is no money to support the mission. So when you have these open positions, that means that you've got people who are doing more than one job, doing things that maybe are not in their wheelhouse. I know an accountant who's now a database manager. It's like, it's a real issue. And then you finally do get somebody onboarded who has time to train them, who has time to get them up to speed. They're often thrown into the deep end, sort of struggling to figure out where their place is and how they can start bringing value. And it's a really, I think fundraising is always difficult, but it's particularly difficult now. And I would like to see more nonprofit leadership recognize that and sort of, do things to help their fundraisers do their jobs and understand, Rich, you mentioned the board. Maybe it is when they have to start, stuffing envelopes and such, they'll understand why it's a big deal.
You bring up so many good points there, Samantha. And I'm seeing this, I'm sure you're seeing this from clients too, right? I'm hearing the low morale issues from executive directors about their boards. I'm hearing it from development directors about their executive directors. It is a period of low morale. But to your point, Samantha, yes, the development professional is always the person that, I don't know how to say this. That development professional is the one that nobody likes to see coming. And I hate that for this profession. I truly do hate that for this profession. And I have seen it in practically every part of every arm of the nonprofit sector, from healthcare to the arts to academia to wherever we are in this world.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. And then one other point that the survey made that I want to bring up is that this staff turnover can be very jarring for donors, especially if you have a benefit to donors that involves giving them kind of a concierge level of service. If you have donors that call in and maybe you're an arts organization, maybe you have subscribers or members, something that's experiential, and donors get treated at a higher level, when there's a shift in who they're able to contact and whether someone picks up the phone or answers an email, that can be very jarring for donors.
And especially on the major donor side of things.
Yeah.
We had a client lose 2 out of their 3 major gift team members between late 2022 and early 2023. And their high dollar fundraising did not recover last year because those fundraisers had made personal relationships with those donors. And that's absolutely important. I'm not knocking that, but they didn't do a good job of then connecting those donors to the mission. So fundraisers have got to be sure that they are building a connection between the donor and the mission. And then nonprofit organizations need to be sure that when they lose staff members, they have a plan to kind of triage those high level donors and those folks who are used to that higher level treatment so that they don't disappear on you. It's very easy for that to happen.
Yeah. I just wanted to underscore the points that you both made. So connecting that donor to the mission, and so that relationship belongs to the organization, not just to the one person. But also, people move on. So let's create that succession plan. I haven't done the research on it lately, but I mean, the average stay for a development professional at a nonprofit has always been ridiculously low,
Really short.
like 18 to 36 months. Why don't we try to keep those folks on board for as long as we can? Let's create some upward mobility opportunities for them. Let's pay them what they're worth. If you give a development professional $1 and they give you $4 back, will you ever stop giving them $1? Come on.
All right, so that's it. That takes us to takeaways. What do you want listeners to take away from this conversation? Are there key recommendations that you would like to highlight from this survey, from our conversations, whatever your fancy? Samantha, let's start with you.
I'm going to say that my biggest takeaway in general, as we get into this new year and you are making your plans, is consistency. And I'm going to throw best practices in there too. So you need to be in front of your donors and your supporters. You need to be in front of them consistently. Donors are creatures of habit. If you always send out a spring mailing, send out your spring mailing. If you need to pull back a bit, maybe you can't go to as many lapsed donors, fine. Instead of going to your 48-month folks, maybe you cut it off at 36 this time around. But have a plan for the year and generally execute that plan. It's fine to make adjustments based on results. And I think that's the key here. You need to make adjustments based on your results. You need to try and avoid making adjustments based on knee-jerk reactions to things that are going on in the world and even within your organization.
Excellent. Rich, what are your takeaways?
I totally agree with Samantha. I'm also going to go back to increasing transparency. So in times of economic uncertainty, transparency about how our funds are being used becomes even more critical. So we need to make sure that we're reaching out to our donors and communicating about our financial health, how donations are being spent, and the challenges that we're facing. That kind of transparency can build trust and encourage continued support. And also, I'm going to throw in one other because Samantha did, so I now feel entitled. Make sure that we're investing in development. Now is not the time to pull back.
That's right.
I've said it before. I will probably say it again.
I'm sure you will say it again.
That's how I roll.
So I've got 6 takeaways.
Overachiever.
I know. Well, I wanted folks,
I would have gotten yelled at if I had 6 takeaways.
I couldn't, there wasn't one that I could leave off. These are all important things to me, and I'm a co-host of this podcast, so I get to do it. So here we go. Number 1, engagement matters, and downgrades and or small gifts are okay. Don't worry about it. Things are changing. The most important thing is to keep people involved. Number 2, in order to keep people involved, you have to provide value to donors. People aren't just going to give because you do great work. Report back to them, keep them engaged, let them know how their gift is being put to work. Number 3, ditch that annual giving is once a year mindset. It's not anymore. People give multiple times a year. They might skip a year. The important thing, again, is to keep them engaged and keep them ready for those times where you really need to call on them and get them giving again. Number 4, don't rely too heavily on Giving Tuesday and some of these other nationwide giving events. It's important. Yes, it's become part of the fabric of the philanthropy industry, but there's a lot of noise during Giving Tuesday especially, and there's a lot of competition out there. And so what we've seen with clients is Giving Tuesday is kind of hit or miss at this point. And number 5, be ready to leverage rapid response fundraising. Rapid response, again, if we look at the pandemic as a rapid response event, which it kind of was, rapid response fundraising is very important in today's environment. And then finally, number 6, if you can, focus on 3 to 5 multi-channel, multi-week micro campaigns per year. If you can't go to your entire file 5 times a year for multiple weeks, it's totally understandable. Not everybody has the budget to do that, but it's important to get beyond just doing a fall a year-end, and maybe a spring appeal. You do have to space things out and try to keep people engaged over perhaps a 5 to 8 week period multiple times a year.
Russ, thanks for that 6-point takeaway list. That explains a lot. You know, that Christmas list that you sent me last month. I hope you were satisfied with the socks that I sent you.
Yeah, all 6 of them.
I think we covered a lot on this episode, and I hope that I hope that all of our listeners put some of our tips into practice. I think that they'll have a really strong start to the year if they do.
I think so too. I think the bottom line, individual giving is changing. We came out of this unprecedented, historic era of the pandemic, and we all have to navigate these changes together. So if I may say so, please keep listening to NPFX. We'll keep bringing you helpful insights and conversations. We'll definitely have Samantha back on because she's fabulous. And we do have some great topics and guests planned for season 5. So if there's a topic you'd like to hear, please send us an email. It's contact@ipmadvancement.com. We read every single one of them. And who knows, maybe we'll reach back out to you and ask you to be a guest.
And remember, IPM Advancement is a full-service fundraising agency. So if you'd like to talk to us about your program, please reach out. We offer a free consultation to NPFX podcast listeners. So just go to ipmadvancement.com/free for details.
And thank you, Samantha, for joining us again.
Yay,
thank
Samantha.
you for sharing your effervescence and your brilliance with us and all our listeners.
Thank you. It is always a pleasure. I really enjoyed myself.
And of course, we want to thank you, our listeners. Thank you to our producer, Curtis Schmidt, to my co-host and friend, Russ Fanoff. It is always a pleasure to start a new year with you, my friend.
Samesies.
All right. And to you, our listeners, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
Cue the music.
And the beat comes in.
Woo!
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.